The name of our webinar today is Improving Shared Service Center Operations, New Best Practices Improve Client Satisfaction. My name is Mike Zuckerman. I'm NOAA's Chief Marketing Officer, and I'll be supported by Ilya Epstein, our Senior Director of Sales Engineering. During this webinar, we're going to talk about several things. We're going to learn how to improve enterprise software shared service center operations. We're going to see how we can reduce costs and yet still improve important KPI that help us manage these shared service centers, such as our user satisfaction. We're going to talk about the three huge sources of client discontent. When speaking with about 5 different analysts, and in one case, 2 different analysts inside the same large organization, the sources of client discontent came out immediately and consistently. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about the new best practices that can resolve these challenges and yet at the same time reduce costs, and we'll share a demonstration of the technology that makes this possible. We feel that this webinar will be valuable both for the Shared Service Center's clients as well as the SSC Operations Team. We're working with shared service centers around the world, and what we find is that from the user perspective, this kind of information can help you drive more value from the relationship and get the best from your SSC. And certainly, if you're on the SSC team, you want to improve profitability, you want to improve performance against KPI, but it's absolutely imperative that you deliver value for your client and satisfaction. A little bit about NOAA. NOAA is a leader in user experience management. We have licensees amongst 20% of the Fortune 50 and hundreds of Global 5,000 customers. The software we'll talk about towards the end. We'll talk about the technology set, but strong ROI makes it compelling for our customers, and a value flows through from a variety of use cases that our customers will implement. Shared service centers are a major area of opportunity for all of us. And based upon the hundreds of registrants for this event, we think you agree. And so we'll talk about specific things you can do and how you can benefit. Our products and the tools that enable shared service centers are available from NOAA, but also through SAP. SAP sells our technology set as SAP UEM by NOAA. And feel free to reach out to any of the SAP sales offices globally to find out more about the product and how SAP can support you directly. We'll talk about the customers later. We'll talk about one specifically, but I think it's fair to say that this technology has been licensed around the globe, from Singapore to South Africa to Russia to EMEA to North America, Latin America, and many, many global references. All of them are very large companies. And they've made a big investment in the software because they believed in the value benefit and the return on investment that came with it. So let's talk about shared service centers. In the IT space, in the final analysis, the impetus for shared service centers was driven by the notion that we could get the best possible set of services at the lowest possible price. In the 90s, corporate America was a bit bloated and had a lot of redundancy across different departments, especially for IT services. And so the notion that we could build a shared service center, whether outsourced or inside sourced, became very, very popular. Shared Service Center brought with them benefits and a compelling promise. First of all, we treat you like a customer. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that your satisfaction is as high as it can be and that you receive the best levels of customer service. We're going to deliver the best performance for you. And the benefit is that because we're going to deliver these services globally or to a large organization, you don't have to maintain these resources in your group, and hence we can reduce cost. Organizationally, from the CIO perspective for an IT service center, whether it be IT services or help desk services or center of excellence services, standardization is so important. Being able to have things work the same way around the globe, seeing that transactions are respectfully treated the same way. This is very important to the organization. So it seemed like the best of all worlds. Treat me as a customer, lower my costs, but give me an unfair advantage because my shared service center is part of my company in many cases. And of course, scalable resources. When I need more, I don't want to worry about the IT budgets. I just want you to make it happen, and we'll work out the billing later. Now, this was, of course, the vision and promise for shared service centers, but day to day we find a different story. There are many, many sources of frustration and discontent with shared service center operations. It impacts, respectfully submitted, both the shared service center ops team and the users and consumers of the service. When we asked analysts, without exception, the number one source of trauma was service level agreements. The fact that the promise that was made and the contracts that were assembled between the SSC and its users just don't seem to be delivered. This is a problem primarily of perception. What you are reporting, shared service center, is not correlating to what my users are telling me. They're frustrated, they're unhappy. I spoke with the head of a center of excellence, a service center in Singapore, my time last night in the Pacific around 6 p.m. I guess it was morning his time. And he was telling me how in this multi-billion-dollar company, when they had these problems, they had to fly one of their IT people out to whatever Asian country it was, or depending on the resources they had, and they had to stand there for 2 days watching the user, again, using a stopwatch to see exactly what was happening and trying to figure out why they weren't seeing the performance. And in the case of a fine application like SAP, it unfairly impacted the perception about SAP performance when in fact he determined there were some network switch issues and router issues. Customers believe that when I had my own team, I could make changes, I could service these needs, and sometimes the shared service center, can't do it as quickly as I could do it. And shared service centers, of course, because of the tools that are available today, most of the tools see infrastructure performance. They see from the desktop down, but the user experiences the performance at the desktop from the desktop up. And then, of course, performance aside, problem thresholds are very, very ambiguous. My users were down, could not save the data, could not get the transaction to work, but all IT can see inside the SSC is that the system was working. So it's very frustrating for both parties. And the tools out there today, existing legacy technology, doesn't provide the KPI or the data to let you understand where the issues are and solve the problem. The second biggest issue that we heard about was cost center allocations don't make sense. We started out with licenses and trying to distribute the cost across the base based upon the number of seats, for instance, if it could be SAP or Siebel that we've licensed. But we know that some of these charges just don't make sense. We're getting charged too much. Yes, you've reduced some of the costs, but it still doesn't feel right to us. Our utilization for my team here in Chicago is really low, much lower than other departments. Why are you charging me so much? And the answer is that the SSC really doesn't have the data to do anything else. The simplest and most direct path, most of the time, is to take the licensed seats, divide the costs up, and then spread things proportionately, and so on and so forth. And there are cases where certain pieces can be broken out, but across the board, most of the time, in 73% of the SSC installations, this is done based upon license seat allocation. So customers often feel unfairly treated because of that allocation. The third area is that over time, because the first thing, service level agreements, grinds away at the users, the SSC is an outside entity, even though it's an inside entity. The cost center allocations grind, and they end up feeling like there's no incentive for improvement, that when we had our team here, these people were working night and day to make things better, and now the incentive seems gone. User support is less, but the SSC is just focused on the efficiency of that process internally, and if they see bigger and more important issues, they just don't react to them because they're driven around one or two or three KPIs that they manage night and day. They have no incentive to reach outside. There's no strategic view to proactively solve classes of problems that we can see, just a tactical view to execute on the things that we've promised we'd deliver. And because of this, there's an unpriced variable, which is the satisfaction of users, right? We want our users to be happier with these big enterprise apps, our mission critical CRM and ERP. And the shared service center may not be as focused on it as we are. We have these tremendously good apps like SAP, and we want them to be all they can be for our users, but the SSC just doesn't seem to have the incentives. So these are the challenges that we have seen very clearly emerge. And now we're going to talk about a little bit about the solutions, a little teeny bit about the technology, then demonstrate a view for the SSC's enterprise dashboard that will enable the SSC and their clients to address these things very directly. The biggest issue in the final analysis is that the SEC's challenge is that they can see everything about the infrastructure most of the time, the network, the storage, the processor, the apps, but they just cannot see how the user is doing at the desktop. They don't know what problems the user is experiencing. They don't actually understand the performance at that desktop, inclusive of the desktop, the network, and the infrastructure that supports it. And by the way, this is the implementation model in over 95% of the Global 5,000. Perhaps less than 5% can actually see and understand the user experience at the desktop in detail. Now, the way you ask this question, the way you start to get visibility to this problem and the gap that it has, is that you ask your CIO or you ask your line of business or you ask your SSC, tell me, what percent of my errors in the day-to-day operation of my SSC are system errors, and what percent are user errors? And the answer is that most SSCs can tell you system errors from a wide variety of reporting tools. But for user errors, they go to the help desk and say how many things were reported, how many are valid, and they get back a number, and they're not really sure. We know from when we implement this technology with SSCs on a global basis or large organizations directly, that when we instrument the organization and let a week go by and look to see what system error and what user error do we have, we find that only 8.4% of the enterprise errors for mission critical CRM and ERP are system errors. Most of the errors are in fact user errors. And of this 91%, which has been hidden and invisible, all the problems that users have, barely 10% are reported. But this technology set sees the error messages and puts them in an analytics framework and makes it visible to the SSC. And this increased visibility really changes everything. It provides an opportunity for the SSC and for the users to address problems that were invisible, to remediate difficulties that were unknown before. And it's a big change. If you look at this graph, this chart, 80% of this was invisible. And these are new KPI. The CIO has not seen them before. The SSC has not seen them before. The major line of business executives that want to manage key transactions have not seen them before. They look at transactions, but they don't know where their users are suffering. So now we can introduce a little bit of the technology set, a little bit of the opportunities for the SSC and the clients, and then move to the demo to highlight how these things might work. The basic technology set is very simple. It monitors every desktop to see exactly what is the user experience, what are they experiencing, right? How is it to your users at that desktop? Not what your server says, not what your APM tools say about the servers, but what your user says about the performance they see. You'd think that this information was easily available today in the enterprise, but it isn't. We're dealing with a top 5 bank, one of the largest banks in the world, and the way they were validating this prior to implementing NOAA's technology set was to position stopwatches in various offices and time transactions at the desktop. So the technology to do this is fairly new, but yet the data now can be available and actionable. This data is automatically aggregated into analytics dashboards and presents an opportunity to take action to solve the problems that are persistent in derailing the benefits that the SSC should provide. Better IT support, user errors, support calls, and we'll talk about those briefly individually. These are the 4 large areas of opportunity for shared service centers. As we deal with shared service centers and we deal with large organizations that outsource various pieces or insource pieces, We always see these same kinds of things over and over. So let's take a look at them briefly. The IT service desk and functional support experience can now change dramatically for the SSC. So in the past, you've seen 10% of those problems, and there's a continual dialogue back and forth with your user to try to reproduce the problem. No wonder they don't call and report them. No wonder they hammer away at them trying to figure out why things aren't working. And now, because you can see data specific to the user error, specific to the user workflow, which she'll show you, all of a sudden the life and volume of these user calls for IT support can now be reduced. You also eliminate ambiguity from the service level agreement because you can see which errors are truly system errors and which errors are truly user errors. In my discussion with the large multinational in Singapore last night, they made it clear to me that our tool was actually helping them understand master data errors, which appear to be user errors a lot of the time. But they were able to see when the data wasn't clean and to see the impact of things that they could never ordinarily find nor discover. And finally, beyond the tactical benefit of improving the day-to-day service as you've structured your agreements with your users between the SSC and the users, now you can develop a more strategic view for proactivity. Because if you can see every error reported or not, the SSC now can be strategic and say, there's an error here that's emerged after this new release. We've had it reported 32 times, but we can see it's impacted 1,400 users today. And we could see that it's caused this amount of downtime. And if they're spending this much on salaries, we can actually see to our customer the lost economic opportunity for their operations to get these transactions processed by end of quarter. It really changes your view of everything and develops a powerful tool for the SSC to find benefit. It improves KPIs, and ultimately, economic benefits aside, really can improve user satisfaction. This is a slide that was presented by a major North American customer on a webinar that you can register for on NOAA's website. It was presented in early November. And there were approximately 600 calls per month just allocated to some of the SAP applications. And by implementing this technology set, they were able to drive that count down by a percentage that's well over 75%. And it's really amazing data. Very few customers actually will release this data, but when they do, it's amazing. And these are the kinds of benefits that are possible. Most of our customers, when they think about how this might impact their shared service center, they model a 10 or 20% reduction. But this is a call reduction. A lot of issues with SAP were in fact training issues and very rarely had to do with the software as much as they had to do with the training and education and the change management process when new releases came out. So very, very telling. You can see this data presented by the user again if you register for the, I believe it was November 8th webinar on our website. Change management is another source of trauma for a shared service center. Immediately after a change, notwithstanding what you do in user acceptance testing, you roll it out, and there are all kinds of new problems. And there's always a gap between what the SSC can see and what the users feel. And this turns into user satisfaction issues. This turns into perceptions about SLA not being met. And with this tool set, now the SSC has visibility to the dashboards that frame these KPI, that frame this performance at the desktop, that show you where the users are struggling versus where the system is struggling. And this really changes the equation for the SSC to diagnose, prioritize, and resolve, to work on fixing those custom transactions with the necessary organizations. Further, you can also get a sense of, are the resources I'm using really appropriate? Am I billing my customer for too much? Application rationalization is the notion that now you can see exactly who is using this piece of information. For instance, it could be a BI report, it could be a certain custom transaction that's been built, and the cost of maintaining an old custom transaction, backing it up, and the storage that goes with it is huge for an enterprise app that supports thousands of users. And now you have a view that lets you understand exactly what the usage profiles are, where they are, and how you can reduce that burden. So So for application support and all the things that go with that, we have a very big opportunity. Training and education seems simple, but it's in fact one of the most compelling areas because for the first time, your curriculum can reflect exactly what the issues are that the users are facing in that office. You can show exactly, here are the top 15 user errors, here's where users are struggling the most, here are the 5 users that are having the most difficulty across a bunch of transactions, and you can do that by geography or by job title or by cost center, any way that you need to do it. And this is an amazing piece of data. 99% of the organizations out there are retraining and following a standard curriculum or spending 10, 20, 50, $100,000 with consultants trying to understand in a general way what the areas of improvement need to be. And now with a tool like this, you can go in and understand how to target training specifically. And this gives the SSC huge leverage and huge value for delivery. The final area that we'll demonstrate a little bit about really shows the line of business much more than they ever knew about the application adoption by their users. And perhaps the hardest thing to understand is, I'm working with this shared service center, but how much of their resources, how much are my users really using? And now you can see by transaction, by time, and in terms of the errors and challenges your users are having, exactly how they're interacting with your key enterprise mission critical apps like SAP. You can see, are they adopting the new transactions? You can see where the issues are. And because you have this data, now you can use cost center based analysis from this system to perhaps allocate the SSC costs much more fairly and much more directly. You can see that we have 60 licenses here, but 40 of those people use it twice a week, and now the SSC can distribute the costs more fairly in a way that reduces some of the frustration we talked about earlier. And without this technology set, that's very, very difficult to impossible to do. We have customers in Latin America that are using this technology exactly that way and find it to be of significant benefit. So we've talked about the 4 opportunities for the shared service center, and now we're going to move to the demonstration portion here to share off some of the dashboards and share how this can improve your best practice. I'm going to empower Ilya, our Senior Director of Systems Engineering globally, to share a demonstration of the product set.
So today's demo, we want to focus on those 3 problem areas that Mike talked about that are typically found within an IT shared service center. Broken SLAs, inability to allocate cost of infrastructure and support by the various cost centers due to lack of meaningful and objective metrics in terms of utilization of the system, and then the inability to deliver proactive support and actually remediate common issues. So the first area we're going to talk about is the broken SLA problem. The challenge that we see with all of the customers that we engage, they have a slew of various APM tools and various monitoring technologies, but they tend not to be able to provide business the SLAs that they really need. To illustrate, what I'm going to show you is that with SAP UEM, the SLAs that we provide are inherently different. Because we have an agent on the desktop, because the agent is actually capturing the user's interaction with the application, we are capturing what's called an end-to-end response time. And for example, if I'm going to click on this operations tab, like I could do within any application, there's a lot of different components that happen. There's a network activity, there is a database query time, there is a BI engine that generated this beautiful dashboard, and then the desktop actually has to render it and allow me to go to the next step. With SAP UEM, we are capturing that end-to-end response time for every operation, every click, within every screen within your enterprise application. So unlike the different component-based metrics, which are capturing the network time, the database time, or the system time, we are capturing that true experience that the user is having. So when business wants an SLA that is meaningful, that is actually telling them what the end user experience is, the only option is to deploy an agent-based technology that can provide them this type of metric. A lot of our customers, before they deploy we're monitoring all of the users all the time, you can actually also measure the impact of the problem. So especially within a shared service center, there's always anecdotal evidence in terms of response time. There's always, phantom type of issues. So you need to know what is the objective problem, and you want to know what is the impact of that problem. With SAP UEM, you actually could identify how many users are being impacted with any one of the response issues. So, for example, if you have poor response issues, but they're only being encountered by one user one time over a month period, you're not going to spend your resources within the shared service center to troubleshoot those problems. You're going to focus on those problems that are impacting a large user community that are happening over and over again and is having a degradation over time. Because we're monitoring all the users and we have information about the end users, such as user attributes like their location, their site, you can also help pinpoint where the problem areas are. So, for example, here, very clearly you can see that there's only one area that is really having an issue. You can break this down by the actual cost center. So if you're supporting multiple business units, business communities, you can actually see what that response time is by the individual cost center. So you can see whether you're delivering the SLAs that you have to that individual business community. And then, of course, because we go deep to a user level, you can also break it down by individual users. So very quickly, you can see that, for example, in this area, the problem is not for all users. Most of the users are doing okay, but the problem is really only for a handful of users. So IT within the shared service center, the infrastructure team, now has some objective metrics that will help them remediate this problem. They can focus on one location, the group of users that are having this problem, and get to the root cause analysis much, much faster. The second area I want to talk about is the problem with cost allocation. With NOAA, we're not just providing you information as to how many users are logging into your enterprise application. You could usually get that from back-end logs or system information. But we're actually measuring what's called the true active time. So for any application, and you can see, by the way, single NOAA agent can monitor multiple applications, we're able to provide you the true active time. Because the agent sits on the desktop, you can actually determine when the user is truly using the application or when the user is just idling and not utilizing it at all. Very often, users launch an application in the morning, but they spend most of their time in a different application. So how do you know what's really being utilized? With NOAA, because we see deep within application, we can even break it down by individual components of the application, individual transactions. So in this example, we're looking at an SAP system. You can actually see the individual T codes and C codes and see the true active time and the number of users that are utilizing these transactions. And this heat map is really telling, right? You have hundreds or thousands of transactions buried here, but are barely being utilized. You can actually see that most of your utilization is happening within maybe 2 dozen of transactions. And then because we have information about the end users, you can actually, again, break down that usage and adoption of the system by the individual site. But what's also interesting within a shared service center is the actual cost center. So you now have some real objective metrics to understand how the infrastructure cost can be allocated by the individual cost centers that are utilizing the system. And this is an objective metric that both business and IT can agree upon because it is based on that front-end monitoring. It's based on the actual end-user desktop. Because we're also monitoring customization, and you can see here within an SAP world, there's a concept of custom transactions. Because we're monitoring customization, the shared service centers can also see the adoption of those customizations. One of the big challenges we see is that customizations tend to get out of hand. You develop them over time, and then people just don't use them. So there's a lot of costs that are being wasted within a shared service center supporting those customizations that have fallen below the economic level of support. That's another use case that is empowered by this data. So you can actually now measure the true utilization of those customizations, see if it's worth maintaining them, go back to business with quantifiable verifiable metrics and have them justify the cost for maintaining these transactions. Because we're monitoring the data continuously, you also have the capacity for trend analysis. And this is important. So within a shared service center, you want to have the ability to do some basic planning, infrastructure, and storage. You can actually see an example here. The blue line represents the current usage of the system, and then the black line, which I'm going to plot right over, is predicting the expected usage. Now, the expected usage is based on historical data. Because we're doing continuous monitoring and we have the baselines established month to month, quarter versus quarter, you can actually see what your expected usage is and what your real usage is, and actually start seeing that gap. And that gap can actually be helpful to understand your planning for the future in terms of the infrastructure cost, and then again, of course, allocation by the individual cost center. The last area I want to talk about is giving the capacity for the shared service centers, primarily the core team, to be proactive. So instead of, like Mike talked about, constantly putting out fires, if you can have visibility into recurring issues and be able to eliminate them, you can actually expand the capacity within your shared service center. So, for example, Mike showed a slide from an existing customer who was able to decrease the number of support tickets by 75% in 12 months. They were able to do it with this type of dashboard. Because with NOAA, you're actually getting a complete list of all of the recurring errors that users are getting. Every type of error that the user gets from the application, those that are really work stopping, those that are either training related or work stopping issues because of authorization or master data. Every error message is being captured, and because we have the user attribute information, we can actually see where those errors are occurring. I'm going to take a look at it from a message group perspective, so you can see here some of the categories. Some of them are pretty simple, training issues, invalid entry. Some of them are a little bit more problematic in terms of slowing the user down, like authorization issues. Sometimes you have master data problems, material issues, master data issues. Every error message is captured, and because, again, we have the user attribute information, I can actually break down those errors by individual locations, departments, but let's take a look at it by individual cost centers. And this is very interesting. So you can see that 75% of my errors are just within 2 cost centers. And the reason why this is important is that there's usually direct correlation between the errors that are being experienced and the tickets, the support tickets that are being opened. So if you have 2 cost centers that are generating, 75% of user errors, very likely those 2 cost centers are utilizing a lot of your resource time. A lot of tickets are being opened by those facilities, by those locations, by those business units. With NOAA, because you have this information proactively, you have this information from the desktop, if you address these problems, if you address these authorization issues in a proactive manner, you can actually reduce the strain on the support. You can expand your support team and expand the capacity to be able to handle projects and to be able to handle additional business areas. Now, because we have this information by the individual users, you can also drill down and actually help the user. So, for example, if I want to see exactly what are these errors that the users are experiencing, within a click of a button, I could actually do a drill down, get a listing of all the errors that the user is getting, so I can see the application, I can see the transaction, the exact screen name where the error has occurred, and of course, what's more importantly, the exact error message. And then, errors a lot of times, are subject to the user's workflow. You really need to understand, what did the user do to get that error? You need some context around that error. Again, with a click of a button, by drilling down, I can pull up a workflow for that individual instance and actually see what led the user to get to that error. So this workflow actually captures historically, step by step, everything the user is doing within the target application. So you can actually see what transaction they navigated to, what screen, how long they stayed on that screen. If the user is getting an error message, he's getting stuck, you can actually see the exact error message. shared service center, it will allow them to be able to reduce the call handle time. It will allow them to reduce the mean time to resolution. So Gardner and Forrester both have statistics that show that a typical level 2 support issue could take 6 to 8 iterations between the support team and the user just to understand what the user did so that they could start working on remediation. With NOAA, because you have this visibility, you're able to do this much faster. Most of our customers could reduce that call handle time by more than 50%. So not only do you have these incredible analytics that help you eliminate recurring issues, eliminate problems that are going to result in the support tickets, but for those tickets that the shared service center is working on, they could further expand the capacity by using this workflow to help reduce the call handle time, reduce the mean time to resolution, and use that capacity for projects, take on additional business units, and improve the service that they provide to the business area. The last area I want to show you is the ability to look at all of these analytics from a business process perspective. And this is important because when the shared service center is providing the service to the business community, they really need to understand the context around the business processes that are being impacted. So with the NOAA solution, you can actually group transactions or screens within different applications into end-to-end business processes. And what this allows is that the shared service center can now focus on those business processes that are really critical to the business. So, for example, financial accounting, right? During a month end or quarter end, all eyes are on financial accounting. You want to make sure that the books are getting closed fast. So you have that visibility to see where am I having my adoption gap? Where am I having a slow response issue? And where are the users generating a lot of problems which are going to end up in the support queue? With a click of a button, an analyst in the shared service center can actually drill down to that business process to further analyze and see where are the areas that we need to focus on. Where can we help business remediate some of these problems? So if I drill down to financial accounting and go to the user errors that are occurring, using the heat map, I could really start understanding my areas to focus on. So, this heat map is really telling because the size of the box is the active time. This is how much time people are spending in each of these process steps. The financial accounting process has about 10 different steps. But if I look at the intensity of the color, most of the errors are happening right here, F22. So without this visibility, very likely the shared service center would be spending a lot of time trying to support the users in these areas where there's really truly no problem. With NOAA visibility, we're actually able to pinpoint and tell you that this transaction, and not only this transaction, but only 2 screens within this transaction are responsible for 90% of all the errors that users are experiencing. And not only that, but you can actually look at the user level and actually see specific users that are getting stuck, specific users that are having work stopping issues. So the shared service center could focus on these specific screens, these specific users, and improve the overall financial accounting process and provide a better service to business. So these are just some of the examples that NOAA can help within a shared service center. It can help you provide new class of SLAs to business that are based on true end-to-end response metrics. We're able to help you objectively allocate costs of infrastructure support and maintenance of your enterprise applications by the NOAA metric. And we're able to help you be proactive, provide better class of service to your business community by eliminating recurring issues, by eliminating user cost problems that are going to end up in a support team. So these are the areas we want to talk about today, and I'm going to pass this back to Mike.
Thank you, Ilya. That was excellent. Thank you to our global audience. We have hundreds of registrants and attendees, and thank you for your questions. The email queue looks about 45 deep, and we will email you back as quickly as we can. Shared service center operations truly remains a large area of opportunity for you, where new technology such as NOAA or is sold by SAP directly, SAP UEM by NOAA, can substantially improve the KPI that the SSC manages to, reduce costs, and ultimately improve user satisfaction, which is the center of the bullseye. If you're interested in our SAP products, you can reach out directly to find out more about SAP UEM by NOAA. Call your SAP account executive or speak with your SAP education team. They are experts on this technology set. If you're an Oracle or Salesforce user, please reach out directly to us here at NOAA. You can email us at sales@noaa.com. As many of the questions have come in that way. Finally, this webinar will be available on demand by close of business today, which is about 4 hours from now. And we want to thank you for your attendance. Let us know how we can help. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.